When you bootstrap a business from scratch, banks don't treat you well. And I was literally just telling my 14-year-old, I'm like, when you suffer, you can go a lot further because you've experienced bad. I want you to suffer early so when it really gets bad, you're not going to blink. You can deal with it.
A lot of people who don't have wealth, they think people inherited, but in reality, 80% of the people who have $1 million or more in net worth made it in their lifetime.
When I got into business early after the military, I worked for PepsiCo, and one of the things we focused on was the simple execution of fundamental things like merchandising the shelves, getting the product to the store on time, and putting it on the shelf in the right format.
If I knew what I know now, I would just do things so much different, to your point, but you don't really learn a lot of the basic investments, finance, how to build a business.
Entrepreneurs in their DNA is independence and being the boss.
So if you were to go back and give your younger self financial advice, what would it be? Welcome to today's Plan Assist podcast, where we try to help people make better financial decisions. And we do it using three core principles: have a plan, be diversified, and seek counsel. And what we'll do is interview people who are really successful and or experts in a particular area, and we'll just have a conversation around how we can help you make better financial decisions. Today, I'm super excited to have Michael Shea. He's a senior partner with Transworld Business Advisors, where he's helped to sell over 425 businesses and has done more than $1.5 billion in transactions. Michael specializes in small business sales, acquisitions, and exit planning, which we'll get into and have a great conversation about that second of the three principles, with a strong track record of guiding owners through one of the most important financial decisions of their life, basically selling the business. So is there anything you want to add to that, Michael? Or you want
No, no, that was a good summary. Obviously, there's more to my life than that, but
Absolutely.
yeah.
But to kind of kick it off. So to stay with the theme of the podcast, I always started off with the same question. So if you were to go back and give your younger self financial advice, what would it be?
To give myself, I wish I had immersed myself in business and how business worked and finance and investments apart from what I had experienced in school. Because what actually happens and what you learn in a book are two different things. That would
That's so true.
Yeah, that would have been the lesson learned early on. It would have accelerated me into certain categories faster and given me a better understanding of how to achieve a financial goal.
Good. That's a great way to start the conversation. And I think it's one of our biggest challenges is a lot of people who don't have wealth, they think people inherited, but in reality, 80% of the people who have $1 million or more in net worth made it in their lifetime. And that's a combination of luck, of being at the right place at the right time, of skill, so it's a whole bunch of those things. And I do find exactly what you said. When I was in my 20s, gosh, if I knew what I know now, I would just do things so much different, to your point, but you don't really learn a lot of the basic investments, finance, how to build a business,
Right.
etc.
Right. You're somewhat handicapped by how you grow up and where you grow up. And generationally, what worked for my father, as someone born in 1929, right? And then how he trained us, and then, hey, go get a job, work for a company, collect the gold watch, and then the economy changes, right? So you somewhat have to have a little bit of a magic 8 ball to anticipate those changes and not get evangelical about one sector or another. You kind of nailed it on the head that people either have it in their real estate or they pivot to the next new thing. Now you see them all doing the Bitcoin thing and you want to beat your head against a wall. And then the general fear of what financial planners do and what the markets really do is another deficit that I didn't learn till much, much later.
Right. And I think that's true with most of us. So to start the conversation, I'll just give you kind of my questions. I've been excited to sit down with you when I looked at your background. Before I kind of give you one of the things, when I started Core Wealth Consultants, before that I'd worked at corporate America. So I'd been at Charles Schwab and Ameriprise, H&R Block. And then when I started Core Wealth, one of the things that kind of came back to me when I looked at businesses that had successful, and I'm talking like the smaller business, the family size business, there were kind of two things that I found pretty universal. And I'm curious to see if you found this to be true or if I was just, kind of bumping into the same thing over and over is number one, the person who started the business had expenses really high on their agenda, paid real close attention to expenses. They didn't let expenses get bubbled out of control. And then they just stayed focused on the one or two things that was making them business. So like I knew a guy that, it doesn't kind of matter what business people pick. If they pick a good business and stay at it and kind of do what they need to do and then keep expenses under control, all of a sudden they wake up 10 years, 15 years later and they have this incredibly valuable business. Do you find that to be true or not true? Or,
Largely, yes. Those when you bootstrap a business from scratch, banks don't treat you well. You've naturally got this left and right limit that forces you to stack nickels, as I like to say it.
oh, that's a good point.
You're extremely, you're usually bootstrapping, you're usually leveraging your time for the investment. Maybe you're leveraging a little bit of equity in your home or you start off. We like to encourage first-time entrepreneurs to get into businesses that cash flow really well to keep those expenses under control. Yeah, because you're getting paid net 30, you can kind of keep the debt down. And then yeah, they tend to singularly focus. There's a tendency on people, just human beings in general, to pivot to the newest flashy ball. You can see the new, yet not deviate from your core four. I when I got into business early after the military, I worked for PepsiCo, and one of the things we focused on was the simple execution of fundamental things like merchandising the shelves, getting the product to the store on time, and putting it on the shelf in the right format. And we focused on our core elements that sold. We had people who focused on the new stuff and how could we apply it to the core business, but your margin, your revenue, your profit generally in most businesses comes from one main thing. And even in my life at Transworld, we've stayed very, very, very singularly focused on one thing. There's been slight evolution over time, but we stay focused on just doing what we do well.
I think if anyone's listening to this, I think that's a piece people have to take away because, to your point, it sounds simple, but a lot of people have a very hard time with that. I mean, like, as an example, I'll see people start their business and they'll be 2 or 3 years in business, and then all of a sudden they're driving this Cadillac Escalade. And I'm like,
Yeah,
what are you doing? And
yeah,
they're like, well, I have to buy it. It weighs so much and I can write the whole thing off. It's like, yeah, but you still have to write it. You still have to pay for it, right? I
right.
mean, they get so focused on
Short term.
short-term costs and makes it, the visual where to your point, like what you learned in the military, well, PepsiCo is a perfect example. I just find these businesses all over the place
Yeah.
that find kind of what
That,
their niche is, and then they just get really good at it and just do it over and over again.
yeah, that tendency to, and that comes to a lack of, business owners don't have generally a good advisory team. If you think of a corporation, they generally have a board, and business owners, from Main Street up to usually middle market, making $1 million, they very often consider their accountant to be their only advisor.
Oh my
And
gosh, all the
and
time.
that's not, they think that the CPA is the end all be all of, and they have their role, but they are not usually business advisors. They're not consulting them about purchasing decisions. They're usually only there at the end towards the tax time, and then it's, hey, I don't want to pay taxes. And to your point, they get singularly focused on that expense. And I always have a conversation of, hey, wealth is not about expenses. There are smarter ways of doing tax mitigation, and that's where I usually hand off to people like you. It's you got to start thinking, and really when I can get someone to understand the difference between in the parlance of someone at the Main Street level, hey, I'm rich, to what's wealth look like, right?
That's it. You got it.
And that's an enormous mind shift to pivot to. It goes to exit planning. It goes to what makes a business significant. You can have all the revenue in the world and all the profit in the world, but there are a lot of things that can make that business worth zero. It's not just a math problem. There's qualitative components to making businesses significant to the market. And they also are things that make you run your business well. Staffing, diversification, implementation of technology, deployment of benefits so that you retain staff. All those things not only contribute to tax mitigation in the short term, but also contribute to the efficient running of the company and the value of it on the exit, and get you higher multiples because there's such an uncommon element to a business at the Main Street or middle market level.
Well, and I can use me as an example. Again, I kind of know what needs to happen, but I run a little solo
Yeah.
RIA investment practice. So I don't have an advisory board, which is very difficult to set up. And what happens is, and I've gone down this rabbit hole 4 or 5 times over the last 10, 12 years, is all of a sudden I'll find myself getting really excited about something. I'll go, go, go. And because I don't have anyone to pull me back or to say that's a really stupid idea,
Yeah.
I get way down the path, right?
Yeah.
And then I have to pull all the way back and say, gosh darn it. Wherein, if you have people around you, I know everyone wants to be on their own because they want to kind of do whatever they want to do and not have a boss. But if you're really going to succeed, you got to figure out how to find that balance of having people that can kind of
Yeah.
give you some pushback on some of your crazy ideas.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be a formal board. It
That's
can
right.
just be people that you trust. You know, I'm not going to ask you how old you are, but you and I are both on the other side of closer to finishing than starting.
Right,
And,
exactly.
and sometimes you have to kind of look with the end in mind. It's like, okay, how long will it really take me to implement this great idea? Is it worth it? Or do I take my chips off the table relative to what my goal? One of the other problems you'll find with those owners is they don't have any other goal. The business is their identity. And as a consequence of that, it's real hard to pivot and make decisions in the context of what's my next step. I mean, you as a financial planner, you're talking about retirement, having enough money to do what you want to do. Dreams are part of that puzzle. But since they don't, most business owners don't have financial planners in their window, they don't ever have that conversation.
And they
It's
don't
not
even
real.
have dreams.
Yeah.
They just like what they do. I mean, like if
Yeah.
you ask them what your hobby is, it's they like going to work. I mean,
That's
they
it. And
truly
you,
like it.
right, and you can do both.
Yeah,
But the pace at which you do things, and sometimes it's you get wiser and older, right? Harken back to my military days. The less at 56, I can remember the lessons learned and understand why organizations did what they did to me 30 years ago. Why do they pair a 21-year-old up with a 40-year-old sergeant? It's to keep the 20-year-old, 21-year-old in check from doing something stupid. And
right.
the 40-year-old may work for him, but he's got some gray hair and wisdom. And entrepreneurs in their DNA is independence and being the boss. And let's face it, they're not always exposed to different lexicons of leadership or management, so they don't understand. You can be in charge but not in command. And having people you seek advice from that you can trust is hard to do because you've got this business, you've got payroll, it's your lifeblood. You think you want to go to people in your industry, but you can't trust them. And that's actually, yeah, you want someone in your industry or who has been in your industry, but you need people with different. That's why boards are comprised of people from all different outlets, but they don't know that because they don't understand how the big world works, or a team of rivals type of advisory committee can be there. So, I found that on the exit planning side, that's contributed to some degree with helping small business owners build stronger companies. So ideally, you'd like to talk to them well in advance of the event of, hey, I want to sell my company. I'm like, well, you're not ready, right? And
And
then
well in advance, what would you say that is? 5 years, 3 years?
I would
What's
say
kind of
five. I
you
mean, the
would?
bare
Wow.
minimum three. It's hard to turn a ship. There's an entire industry now that's kind of born out of with exit planners. I don't do a ton of it from a fee standpoint. I do it, hey, let me work with your tax advisor and financial advisor so that you have wealth when it is time to sell. Because if we've not seen anything in the last 20 years, the amount of dramatic shifts in the market, the macroeconomic market, what not just the exchanges and equities, but how that impacts small business. We've had COVID, we've had the real estate crush, we've had inflation, double essentially. We now have immigration, which in Florida has an impact. You live up in Claremont, right, or Winter Garden. There's a
Yeah,
whole lot
same
of
thing.
expats
Yeah.
there. That's not the market it was 5 years ago because of their exchange rates. And those are all things that, from an exit standpoint, is part of our local dynamic, but seriously impact the ability of an owner to take their chips off the table. And everything from the way their books are laid out to the cost of labor. I just had a young man call me today. He's got a great restaurant, in 1 year profitable, but his cost of goods are out of whack because of the commodities on steak and beef. And there's not thing one he can do about that. There's not thing one he can do.
Wow.
That's and when he's doing 1.7 million, and his valuation ain't where it needs to be.
And where would you come into the picture? Like, how would you get paid? Let's say you're running a business and I want to just start at least getting my business in order, even if I'm not ready to sell. Where would someone like you show up? Or do you have
So
someone that would show up earlier and then you come in later?
no, I encourage that on an annual basis, people call me. I don't charge people for any of that. I try and have a very long tail relationship. Now, guess what? When you engage me when it's time to retire, we're not haggling over my fee.
Right.
My fee is
Exactly.
going to be my fee. Hopefully, I've created some value for you up until that point. And, I'm the only one in the cycle who's not, right? But I kind of bridge the gap because, after, I sold 426 tomorrow, and I probably looked at several thousand over 20 years.
So you've kind of seen about everything.
I've seen just about everything you can imagine from manufacturing, and I've seen how the books are done, and I can kind of coach people as to why they need to put steps in place or cash balance. I mean, I had a young man come to me, all of his money's in real estate. He's got three young children, he's having heart issues. And the first thing I said to him is, why don't you have a disability policy or a life insurance policy? Which is not my wheelhouse.
Right.
But in light of what the real problem was, that was the real problem.
And that was obvious to you once you kind of did the list. It
Well,
was
look,
like, your big problem
yeah.
is this.
Look, so the good things about the way I was raised was, I built a financial plan when I got married and planned out literally right to how many years apart my children would be. I had equities. My father did have me meet up with a financial planner. I didn't really understand it, but I did know, a penny saved is a penny earned. I did know that how the markets generally work. When I got married, knew I needed to have a life insurance policy. I knew I needed to have a disability policy. When you own a business, you learn about those things. And then as you start to feel the pain of taxes, a practice like yours and a practice like mine, where there's not a lot of games you can play, you have to, there's only so many things you can do from a tax mitigation standpoint. So I deploy those things. And then as a consequence of managing all these transactions, I've seen how, because of their poor tax planning, very short-term thinking, it costs them later or makes their business unsellable. And to our conversation earlier, if 80% of your wealth is tied up in your business and you can't sell it, that is horrific.
Yeah,
That is
no, that can add. And that takes me to my first kind of principle is have a plan. When I talk about having a plan to a small business owner or an individual or a 60-year-old person, doesn't matter where they're at, plans got a really bad name to attach to them back in the late 90s, early 2000s because the insurance companies, the big insurance companies went out and hired tens of thousands of these agents. And these agents would come and tell everyone we're going to do a financial plan.
Yeah,
And what it
they're not financial
That's
planners.
correct. They're really a sales process,
That's
right?
right. That's
They're
right.
designed to sell life insurance. They're designed to sell long-term care. They're not really a financial plan. So people got their bubbles burst with this whole planning piece. And the way I tried to explain it to people is I said, think about it like this. If you build an extension on your home, you're going to have at some point an architect and an engineer sign off on here's what we're doing. That's kind of big picture. And when you get those blueprints, they'll be 20, 30 pages attached to those blueprints. I said, but really, once you get the blueprints and you've kind of looked them over and everything, what happens from that point forward is you'll have a super hyper focus on one or two pages, right? So this week we're going to get the foundation done, or we're going to get the windows in, or we're going to get I said, really building a successful financial plan is the same exact thing. You go and do what you did, this 20-year plan, kind of put all your pieces in there. But really what makes it successful is that attention to the next whatever period of time makes sense. For that
Right.
next 3 months, I'll sit down with clients and say, okay, here's the three or four things that I want you to do over the next 6 months. And I'll touch bases with them. And sometimes there's simple stuff there, to your point. Get a SEP IRA set up, increase your 401k contribution, buy a life insurance policy, get your will up to date. It's just that list
Right.
of stuff, but it
Right.
doesn't sound like a lot. But my point that I'll make to people is I'll say, look, you've not done it like this, but I said, if you look at people who are successful, they may not be able to explain how they do it, but if you watch them, what I just described is how they do it. And then they'll do that 10 or 20 times over the course of 10 years. And I
Yeah.
said, next thing you know, you're like
Right.
rich.
Right. Well, you're wealthy, right? The distinct,
Exactly.
right? And I got to do that. My father was a doctor, so he was self-employed. I got to watch how he raised five, drove the same car, did afforded to send us to private school. But in hindsight, now I can see where he did struggle with cash flow. I remember the office was in the basement. I looked at the AR accounts receivable draw versus the cash paying draw, and I could hear my mom bitching about the guy at the country club who didn't pay the bill type stuff. And then, I had the blessing of got to take care of my parents for the last 15 years of their life.
Isn't
And
that the best blessing? I got to do that
oh,
with my mom. I'm telling
but
you.
you learn, the fixation at that age is, do you have enough to get you to the end? And they had enough. They had more than enough. My father had second to die policies. My father had Blue Cross Blue Shield, all the best. And then at the
Uh-huh.
end, got to live with me. And then the real estate, and Hyde said you get to go look at the real estate play, the adjustment, the downsize, the adjustment, the downsize, the adjusting of lifestyle relative to what you go. So like, I have a young lady, 62, owns a business in St. Pete. Met with him yesterday. She owns a commercial property. She owns her house. She has two houses. She's got a house in North Carolina. And she's done her best to figure out her expenses and what's going to cost her. And I had to say to her, "You're not keeping both houses. It's not going to happen. You can't afford it. One's not near a hospital, and you're going to need a hospital at some point, right? And then, but you do own these houses, so you're in a pretty good place. You got to, net after taxes. You're going to walk with 1.5 million. You're not going to spend 150 grand a year, but you'll probably spend 75 to 80 in your tail end." And she hadn't calculated her Social Security because she didn't know how to. So the point being that as you go through that process of managing end of life, it gives you some forward thinking with regard to how you interface with customers to deal with reality, right? And it's like, let me tell you how you do this safely and leave a legacy to your family. And that's critical because in light of that, we've made that comment that business owners, they can never see themselves not doing the business. I'm like, guess what? We're all going to die in our pajamas in a bed. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah,
you
no,
know.
that's right.
So you can think you're going to work till you drop, but that's a euphemism, and that's not realistic. And you owe it to your family to do otherwise.
And what I meant by the blessing to be with our parents kind of end of life is even though I'd been a financial advisor my whole life, I mean, I started as a trader on the floor of the commodity exchanges and, I've always been around the money. But but I mean to tell you, my eyes were really opened when I started helping my mom kind of the last move out of her apartment, go into assisted independent living, then go to assisted living, and kind of looking at her long-term policies and helping her with, okay, how much money do we really have?
Yeah.
It was just eye-opening. And a lot of financial advisors, I've gotten in some really lively debates with some of my counterparts because I'll say, we don't really help people at that last 5 years of their life. And we can't. We can't even
No.
legally help them, right? I mean, we
Cards
can't
are
do
cards are dealt.
they're
Cards.
tough, and we can't do their bills. We can't do their. I mean, we
Right.
just. I mean, but all these advisors will act like, okay, well, we're doing it, and like I'll tell my clients, I say, you have to understand something. I'm probably not your last advisor. We got to put something in place for that. What's the middle piece when you
Yeah.
can't do it? Who's going to
Who's it
pay
going to
your
be?
bill? That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
And
And
and and having and I would tell you that probably that experience gave me a whole lot in concert with dealing with business owners who didn't plan and business owners who did. And it, you can tell real stories about, hey, this is what happens when you do it right. And you can see, and you have to tread lightly on these shells, the behaviors or habits or family members that pose a risk.
And our parents were lucky because they had us. Okay. Well, I even have gone in and I said, what happens if a
If you
parent,
don't, if you
if you
don't.
don't have someone like us who's really financially astute, I mean, we do, I mean, what happens? I mean, they just go into some hole and it's a disaster. And if they
That's
have
what
a
happened.
small business, it's even worse.
Right. And then when that business leaves the market, there's a hole that's left to employees. And I've seen that many times. It's not uncommon for small business owners have health problems. The first thing to get cut when things get tight is health benefits to the owner. And, rarely are they getting I'll just nut up and muscle through it. Right. And then they have a heart attack. I've had people drop dead. Cancer hits them and then you got 60 days to put a plan together. Car accidents. You know, I've had colleagues in my own firm, have massive heart attacks and leave their family with nothing, and they don't know where the bank account numbers are. And I was real organized, and I've still got a stack of stuff on my desk to deal with, and
Well,
I deal with.
50% of Americans don't even have a will.
Right,
50%.
right, and
I mean,
it's a burden. I'm a good Catholic boy from the Northeast, and the Knights of Columbus at our insurance company, and I would stand in front of those men and go, if you don't have a life insurance policy and a disability policy, you are, and I would scold them. The priest would yell at me. I go, you're irresponsible. They go,
yeah.
that organization was formed for the widows and the orphans, and you're supposed to be carrying on that legacy, and you're not caring for your own family. Pull your head out of
Yeah.
your butt and get your disability policy signed up.
That's awesome.
Not unlike what we would do in the Army. I'd stand the kids up with their SGLI insurance and like pick somebody, and it better not be the girl at the local bar. It better go to your mother, you know? But when you get to small business, it's the price of freedom. These people have the options to do what they want, and sometimes the small business owners don't have a lot of options. They're squeezed by the banks. Financial advisors. I've had financial advisors who won't deal with small business owners because they're hard to manage. And sometimes you ask like where I sit. Sometimes I function as a foil, as like hey, that guy's not wrong. Now you may not be able to do it even with my own financial advisor. Like he wants me to do something right now, but like, brother, I got cash flow issues, right? I got to manage a business. I got 3 kids in private school. I
Right.
can't just broke a $45,000 check for a long-term care policy right now. I can do it in Q1 when I have this liquidity event or I get this transaction done.
Exactly.
And he's like, but I'm like, you let me manage the business, you set the strategy, I'll achieve those goals. So there's always a healthy tension, but sometimes business owners are because they're just not astute, that lack of learning that I alluded to early, they're sometimes intimidated.
And then they lack two things that are critical to financial success. They lack confidence and they lack trust, right?
Yeah,
So if
yeah,
you lack both of those things, then what happens is all of a sudden, like to your point, he's saying do this. Well, you have lots of confidence and you trust that the advisor's trying to do the best for you. It's just not now.
yeah.
It's not no, it's just no now.
Right. And in your experience and in other financial advisors, you know, building a relationship of trust takes a long period of time.
That's right.
And sometimes you pick the person you like, and that's actually not what you want. You like the person who's competent, who makes good serious. I mean, I think about it was funny. I was not the favorite of my mother or my father, right? Because I left the house, I went off to do business, I didn't follow instructions, I was the rebel. But when it came time to handling the estate, they knew let's take the mean son of a gun
Oh
down.
my gosh, you and I are both identical. That
Yeah,
that
yeah.
happened the exact same thing. I went off to Chicago. I want to trade. I'm going to go and whatever.
Right, right.
Okay.
And that's important. It's making decisions about who's going to do what's right for everybody and care for people and make tough decisions when tough decisions have to be made,
That's
you know,
right.
because there will be tough decisions.
That's exactly right. And someone has to have the tenacity and the ability to do that. So we've kind of done a really good job kind of covering having a plan. So everyone understand having a plan does not mean some 45-page PDF document you drop in a file and never look at it. It means
Yeah, it's
here's
not the
where you
book,
are.
not the
That's right.
PowerPoint.
It's
Yeah.
here's where I am now. Here's where I want to go. And then what are those kind of key things you do in the middle? And there's a lot, and those are very personal. They're not something
Yeah,
you
and I would add that, the business owner needs a level of accountability. I don't care who your advisor is, but that person needs to hold you accountable because, no plan survives first contact, that we used to say in the Army, right? You can make the best plans, but as soon as the enemy has a say, so too does life, right? So, hey, I want to sell when I'm 67, but the market crashes and interest rates go to 10 and a half for a loan. Well, you may not sell. But
I,
if you've prepared, if you've built wealth from the beginning,
that's right.
your ability to adjust terms at the time of the trigger is easier to do because you have the wealth. Waiting to pull the 80% out of the business is not an option. You have to prepare years in advance, and you've got to have that accountability piece, someone who can call it as it is and get you to fix it.
I find that small businesses, the accountability piece is the hardest. I own my own business, but I grew up in a world where I had lots of accountability in the armed services like you were, but I did have coaches. I had crazy bosses. I had boards that I had to go and give presentations to. But so now when I am not doing what I need to do, I'm actually self-aware I'm not doing it, right?
Yeah.
So I make a decision kind of I should be doing this, but I'm not. At least I'm aware of it. What I find with some of these small businesses is they're not even self-aware enough to say that they should be doing this. I mean,
And
because
that
they've
and
never
that
grown up in a world that pushes back at them. They've just grown up as the boss for their whole life.
Right. And that is, you're competing as an advisor with, how they were educated. I mean, that's a whole nother podcast, right? What do we
Yeah,
teach our
exactly.
kids in school to be able to see? I mean, I had a young man come to me, mother and father, doctors, nurse practitioner, and he went on to become an electrical lineman. And he came to me to buy a business. He was making 125, making $185,000 a year, had $200,000 in the bank, and he was like, "I want to buy a business." And I looked him dead in the eye and go, "No, I want to." I'm like, "You're not ready. You don't know how." right? You don't have those learning. There's a lot of learning you have to do, but you're killing it in a trade where you're a scarce item and you're young. And I go, you need to stay right where you are. Put the
Yeah.
money in the market at 8%, live within your means. Don't make any dumb purchases. He had a little side business flipping equipment and stuff, and he was killing it there. I said, you're in the top 1% for your age bracket. Stop it. But he didn't have that context.
Exactly. It was the self-awareness, right?
Right.
They just
Right.
didn't have anyone, unless they sit down with someone who's totally unbiased, that doesn't
Right.
really care and give them a feedback. All right,
Right.
so let's talk about the second of the three. So diversification. Here's the biggest challenge that most people have when it comes to building, holding on to wealth. There was a statistic that I saw recent, so this is in the last couple of months, that 18% of Americans, 18% of households, not Americans, 18% of households have a net worth of $1 million. Okay. Now,
Mhm.
I was pretty surprised by that when I saw the number. I'm like, wow, that's a big number, to have that big a number. But then when you really dug into the numbers, you found out, no, no, no. It's actually 3% have $1 million outside their homes.
There you go.
Right. So the point becomes on diversification is concentration creates wealth. Diversification preserves wealth. It's important to understand that there are going to be long periods of your investment career where you will be concentrated in a small business, maybe in a house for a period of time, maybe in the
And
company you work
therefore,
for,
and therefore risk goes up.
substantially higher. Exactly. But you need to be aware. It goes back to the self-aware. That means you need to have a diversification strategy. So as time goes, you want to figure out how to take money off the table and do it when it makes the most sense, but it has to be personalized, right? Like listening to some guy on an 800 number isn't going to work. You're going to have to sit down with someone because everyone's life's personal. Do you find what I just said to be true?
Wholeheartedly.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of my view of the world is predicated on having been in the army. And, when you're a young soldier, you don't have a lot.
Right.
I've lived in a trailer.
Yeah,
I
but
was
most of us didn't. I didn't either.
I
So
was pretty happy in a trailer.
yeah, that
And
was an upgrade to you.
well, no, I was look. Remember, Doctor's Son, Silver Spoon,
Oh,
trailer,
that's true.
right? And when you look at your property, you kind of like there's an old line from it's actually from the Bible. It's I think it's in the Psalms. It's teach them to deny themselves. Right. I remember from a Robert E. Lee writing home to his wife when he was off in the Civil War, telling his wife to tell his children to deny them of the good things so that they'll learn that what they can live and that what they can suffer. And when you've been poor, and I was literally just telling my 14-year-old, I'm like, when you suffer, you can go a lot further because you've experienced bad. I want you to suffer early so when it really gets bad, you're not going to blink. You could deal with it. And having watched my parents go from my father from abject poverty to a doctor to a nice house to build wealth to downsize to downsize to downsize, mostly driven by health events, right? But I also watched his when he retired, he had like 1.5 million. But the downsizing of the liquidity on those properties, which were tax free, those timed with luck, you nailed it early, the luck of who was in the office and how the markets played
Uh-huh.
allowed him to generate more money in his retirement than he did in the 30 years he worked, right?
My gosh.
Coupled with an adjustment of expenditures
Yep.
driven by health. But, I remember saying to him one day, man, he freaked out about not having enough money. My dad, you spend $5,600 a month. That's what you spend. I could, you got more money than I know what to do with before even I cash out the life insurance policies if I so chose to do. But, the point being, starting with the end in mind, and if business owners have that goal, and
Yep.
I always think, the conversation you and I have, and these types of conversations for business owners, or even just a, retiring executive or a person working, is, a healthy understanding of this ends is kind of the trigger point that forces you to adjust the way you spend money, right? And
Yeah.
how to build wealth. I didn't even like that word rich. As you
No, I
raise
agree with you.
children, the unintended benefit of my father living next door to me when he was, in his late retirement, in his 80s, I would say to my children, who's the richest person you know? And they'd always point to the people in the mansions in the back. And I'd go, no, they're in debt. The richest guy you know is the guy wearing a t-shirt, the sweatpants, and the Crocs watching Yankee games in his leather chair next door. That's the richest guy. And like, no, I'm like, yeah, let's show you what's in the bank account. And like, oh my God, yeah, well, then why doesn't he live different? He doesn't need to. It's not a need thing. He's building wealth for his family and to take care of people what turned out to be another 15 years. But the wealth kept coming because he planned, he lived within his means, and that there is that disconnect that's occurred. Now I've got college students, and I told fortunately I have their mail come here, and the amount of credit cards they get sent is mind numbing. So when my kids came home for fall break, if you see all these, you're being sold to at 22% interest. Don't sign any freaking credit cards.
Yes.
But those are
That's such a
fundamental.
shame.
Yeah, but it's a great lesson if you're the lion that knows what's being sold to you. If
That's
you're if
true.
you're if you're situationally aware, you're not going to get yourself in a situation when something goes wrong. You go to the statistics on those families, who has $1 million, who doesn't have $1 million, how much is in their home. All you and I can do is point out the reality. If they live in denial, they live in denial. It's that, but if we can change the mindset about, hey, building wealth, you know, saving money, having the wherewithal to deal with the storm that'll come. And you'll know this. I'm in this business 20 years, and because I've been in it 20 years, I've seen cycles. My franchisees have not seen cycles that I've seen. So
Right.
I can see leading indicators that indicate certain things to me. That luck makes them not see because they got lucky on something or they got a big deal done and they've got the cash. I'm like, okay, you got to always do the blocking and the tackling. You got to always do the fundamentals because the fundamentals are what carry you through to the end, not the short-term wins. I mean, just
And
ask the Gators.
no, and that's no, and you're dead on because that's why I came up with have a plan B diversified seed council. Those are the fundamentals, right? And people don't realize how I came up with those when I started Core Wealth back in 2012. I was like, what is it that really successful people do? And I found 5 or 6 common denominators. So it wasn't terribly difficult to kind of identify, but it wasn't, it was still pretty broad. And then I watched a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting where Warren Buffett got on and Warren and Charlie Munger said, someone asked him, what was the best financial lesson you ever learned? And with no pause or anything, he looked and said, it was invert everything. And what he meant by invert everything was he was a weatherman in the army. And one of the things that he did was when he was a weatherman, he realized that telling those pilots, you have blue skies, low winds, et cetera, didn't add much value to those pilots' lives.
Mhm.
It was, hey, you have ice, you have thunderstorms coming in, you have high winds. That added massive value. And he took that lesson into his real estate life and into Berkshire Hathaway. And so I did the same thing when I started Core Wealth. I said, okay, well, what is it people that have a lot of financial chaos in their lives not do? And then I found those three have a plan B diversified seek counsel. People who aren't successful, they almost uniformly are challenged by all three of those. And then I looked at the people who are successful and they're usually really good. So, that whole diversification's a art within science, but it is a challenge and one of the things that you can help people with. And then the last that I want to kind of hit on, I want to make sure I touch on it is the seeking counsel piece. I find again, people who have developed an indecent amount of wealth, they're just really, really good at getting input. So I'll get feedback. People say, I don't want to really seek counsel. I'm like, then just call it input. Call it, be curious. Call it whatever you want to call it, but make sure that you go and ask people what they think.
Yeah, and understand that seeking counsel does not make you any less intelligent than another. My wife's in the medical field, and my father was too. And as I care for my parents, doctors routinely refer to other doctors, right?
That's a great example.
Who are specialists. My father was an anesthesiologist, but he did not, he would consult with regard to getting the patient out, getting the patient up, right? Making sure they don't feel it, right? What's it going to take? What's their comorbidities? What can they tolerate? And then how long is the procedure going to be? And, are there any ancillary impact items? But as I cared for my mom, we had infectious disease, we had freaking geriatrics, we had, an oncologist, we had surgical consults. I mean, you name it. I mean, she had more doctors than I have fingers and toes at one point, but they all seek counsel because they get very, very specialized. But at the end of the day, a healthy understanding from all advisors. That's one of the neat things about the exit planning process that should start so early is there are a number of people in the mix. There's legal counsel, there's your accounting team, there's your financial planner, and there's your broker. And the owner needs to be the captain of the ship. And these people all have functional disciplines. None of them should be steering, right?
Right.
And it shouldn't be solving the puzzle in the light of one element. It should be very much collaborative. And in the context, like if Tim Clifford's doing his job on financial and you get the seller to $5 million and the market goes to 10% interest, which decreases the value of the business, and the goal was to get to 5 million, then you can sell the thing on an owner finance note, wash your hands and walk because you've got enough wealth. Because the goal is to exit,
Right.
not to hang on and run the thing until you drop, right? That's the goal to achieve that goal. So, conversely, if they're banking on me to perform a miracle and I can't control the markets and I can't control the lending rates because Donald decides to hit China with 100%, tariff and cost of goods escalates. We're seeing that right now in some businesses where tariffs have impacted. Well, the cost of goods have gone up or the commodity markets have gone up in restaurants, profits drop. Guess what? Valuation drops. It's not static.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
those aren't a function of our ability. But with time, early start, with time, you have an easier way to deal with the vagaries of the market, right? And the inversion thing's kind of it. It's like, okay, we know we're going to hit storms. It will not be rainbows and unicorns. If the only variable that is in the control of the seller or the business owner or the person looking towards retirement, and it's the variable that creates the most friction, is time. The sooner you start, the wealthier you get, right?
And the more patient you are and the more time you give it.
Right. And you can take a punch.
Yeah, exactly. And people that I know, that's probably their single biggest superpower is
Right.
they have this patience and kind of think about things more in a decade versus a
Yeah,
month or a
it's
quarter.
look, when I buried my father, some of his colleagues showed up in their 80s, they're still working. And my brother's like, why are they still working? And I simply said, they're on their second wives.
Yeah, exactly.
They all had their income cut in half. They get a divorce.
Yeah.
Dad didn't do that. Right. So dad got to chill out and work and then played the equity lift on the real estate. And everyone thinks he's the wisest man on the earth. Not,
So
it's
so
not
so so
hard. It's not hard.
no, exactly. So to summarize the seek counsel, and then I kind of want you to kind of finish or kind of give me some your views is when I say seek counsel, what I'm basically trying to communicate is when you're making a particular financial decision, the goal is to get a clear understanding of what best case scenario is, what's worst case scenario, and then what's likely. And then you ask enough people to come to some sense. You're not looking for salespeople. You're looking for input that you combine them all. Because one of the things that'll happen a lot of times that'll happen over and over is a lot of times those people can't tell you who gave them the advice. And it's not like they don't want to give that person credit. It's just they can't because they talk to you, they talk to me, they talk to their CPA, they talk to, someone in the business. So they went and talked to 8 or 9 people. And the combination of all of us came to some decision. It wasn't what I said or you said or the accountant said. It was some variation that caused them to
Yeah.
come to some
It's
decision.
the pot boils and it suddenly triggers,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. That's exactly right.
I can think of the dumb mistakes I've made in my life, and it all harkens back to Aesop's fables.
Yeah,
It's like the reason they teach us that stuff as a child is because they're true.
yeah,
Tortoise and the hare, Three Little Pigs. Someone says to me, well, I will use those analogies from time to time because it resonates with everybody, and they kind of chuckle. I go, I'm not joking. If you build your house out of concrete, it's going to stand. I got a buddy who just bought a house down on the coast. I was at a football game with him Friday night, and I looked at him. I go, you do know that God's kind of wiped that thing clean 3 times, right? He's like, yeah, I know. I said, so why are you doing it? Like, why don't you just get an Airbnb if you want to go to the beach? I live in Lakeland, right? So we're a good hour and a half from the beach. And the
yeah,
guy,
exactly.
and when a cat three hits, we feel the cat three, right? It's not, did you not read the papers last year? Why would you do that? Because it's always going to happen to the other guy. And, that's when I use my sarcasm to kind of punch them home. But they know, but it's the human nature. It's the lesser angels of our nature, to coin a phrase or to parlance off Lincoln, right? It's your inability to kind of do what's fundamentally right. And you get swayed by, the greed, what is it? The need to have toys. You kind of alluded to the business owner who has a nice Mercedes and the leather and all these extra cars, and they think they're saving money. I'm like, you realize that sucker depreciates right off the mark, right?
Yeah,
Right. I mean,
exactly.
that's a bad decision on 80 different variables, right? Like,
Yeah.
why don't you just put it in the market at 6 to 8% sit back, and then you can retire 5 years earlier?
Yeah, because it's the same. You can put it in a simple IRA or a SEP
Right.
IRA about the same
Or a
amount of
cash
money
balance
and
plan,
still write it off versus
right.
drive some.
Well, look, I had those conversations when my wife, who grew up, on a farm where all the money was poured into the farm, into the equipment, big farm, 1,000 acres, right? They weren't exposed to this. They bought more land, right? And the need to have cash was something that they had to deal with. Getting my wife to understand that just because it's in the equities market doesn't mean I can't access it. You know,
Yeah, no, that's right.
you
That's
know,
a
I
good
can
point.
borrow against it. I mean, but these are things that they're not exposed to. So hence to the first question, like what did I wish I knew? The earlier I'd known, the faster I would put money away. You
That's a
know,
that's an awesome way to finish. So how do people get in contact with you? Kind of as we tie
just
this
about
up.
anyway. I'm all over the internet. You can go to yourfloridabusinessbroker.com.
Okay.
You can call me at 321-287-0349, or you can email me at mike@tworld.com.
Okay. Well, Mike, I really appreciate that. It's been a fun conversation. It's been really
Likewise.
moving forward. I appreciate your time and the input and your wisdom that you shared with the listeners. So with that, have a great day. Thanks a bunch. I
Yep.
appreciate it again.
Thank you.